Mark Rutte, who is speaking from Sweden. We're going to listen into that now.
A very good meeting of NATO foreign ministers. But first I want to thank the King and Queen and the Prime Minister Christensen, and of course the Foreign Minister of Sweden for their hospitality here in beautiful Helsingborg. This is the first meeting of NATO foreign ministers hosted by Sweden, which joined our alliance 2 years ago. And the location says a lot. Today, all Nordic countries, including Finland, that joined in 2023, are together in the NATO alliance, sharing common commitment to our collective defense and making the alliance stronger. And a stronger NATO is what we have been discussing here in Helsingborg today. Because the threats we face are real. And we are committed to ensuring that NATO remains ready and able to address any challenge today, tomorrow, and well beyond. To ensure NATO remains ready, we need to invest in our defense, produce the capabilities we need, and continue our support for Ukraine. These are our priorities for the upcoming NATO summit in Ankara, and that is exactly what foreign ministers have been working to prepare. Last year in The Hague, allies, as you know, made a historic commitment to invest 5% of GDP in defense. The need for this investment is clear, and we are seeing real progress as allies make major increases to their investments. In 2025, defense investment from European allies and Canada was up by 20%. This trend will continue. Today, ministers discussed how their countries are charting a credible path to the 5%. This means steady and sustained increase in defense investment. Ambitious and achievable. And while increased investment is essential, it isn't an end in itself. It is a means through which we become more capable so that we can further strengthen our armed forces and ensure they have the equipment they need to deter any adversary and defend every ally. We know that today our industries are not able to produce everything we require. So foreign ministers addressed this urgent need to ramp up defense industrial production across the alliance. We need to produce faster and at greater scale on both sides of the Atlantic. We do this best when we work together. And ministers agreed that we must continue to press for continued cooperation across the alliance to boost our defense industrial capacity. As allies invest more and produce more, we are also focused on ensuring that NATO is not only stronger, but also fairer. And we see European allies and Canada taking on greater responsibility for our shared security. And this is crucial. It makes the whole alliance stronger, firmly anchored by the transatlantic bond. I know some have been questioning that bond, and perhaps even questioning the resolve of this alliance to remain united in the face of an adversary. So let me be crystal clear. Allies' commitment to Article 5 is ironclad. Our resolve and ability to defend every ally is absolute. Were anyone to be foolish as to attack us, the response would be devastating. This is a defensive alliance. We are strengthening NATO to deter aggression and to ensure we are able to defend it, if necessary. And this is the path we will continue to pursue. An important part of ensuring our own security is continuing our support for Ukraine. And this was another topic of discussion among foreign ministers. Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha, joined us here on Thursday evening. Russia continues to wage its horrific war and target civilians and civilian infrastructure. Ukraine continues to defend its sovereignty and independence with bravery and ingenuity. And we are working to ensure that our support for Ukraine remains substantial, remains predictable, remains sustainable and based on Ukraine's critical requirements. The prioritized Ukraine requirement list Pearl remains an important mechanism for delivering urgent support to Ukraine, providing crucial US equipment that makes a real difference on the front lines and helps protect Ukraine's cities and civilians. Allies continue to contribute through this and other means. Ukraine must have what it needs to defend itself today and deter future aggression tomorrow. Finally, ministers exchanged views on wider developments affecting Allied security, including in the Middle East. Iran continues to attempt to hold the global economy hostage by closing the Strait of Hormuz. This direct assault on freedom of navigation and global commerce impacts us all. It is important that countries are coming together around plans to ensure that the strait can be open for transit, including by moving essential assets to the region. This is another clear reminder of how security challenges are increasingly interconnected, and that allies and partners have a strong interest in working closely and proactively together. Our discussions here in Helsingborg have been essential as we prepare for our summit in Ankara just 6 weeks from now. And the task ahead is clear: to turn Allied commitments into concrete results, increased investment, industrial production and continued support for Ukraine. All of this contributes to a stronger NATO and greater security for all of us. Sweden joined the alliance 2 years ago because the security situation in Europe had fundamentally changed. Together, all allies are shaping NATO's response. Enhanced deterrence and defence, better burden sharing, increased defence production and consistent support for Ukraine. In a more dangerous world, we are actively building a stronger NATO. And with that, I'm ready to take your questions.
All right, let's start here with SVT in the second row.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary General. The Swedish Foreign Minister, good afternoon. The Swedish Foreign Minister had hoped that this meeting in Helsingborg would mark a new start for the alliance after a very turbulent period. How do you see it turning out? And if yes, what was key?
Well, a new start, I don't know. I would phrase it a little bit different. I think it was a very good meeting. It was a very good meeting where we really were coming together again. And this is a democratic alliance. You will always have debates in NATO. You've seen this. And when you look at NATO now compared to NATO only 1 or 2 years ago, the difference is huge. The spending has gone up, industrial production, the support for Ukraine, the transatlantic bond. I think all of this is in so much better shape than only a couple of years ago. So the NATO is stronger, but today was important because there are always tensions you want to discuss. And of course, we have to make sure that the summit in Ankara really delivers. And I have every confidence.
Okay, just next to him.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You advocate for a stronger Europe in a stronger NATO. How long do you think the Europeans have to complete the shifting? And do you see it at the same time as killing 2 birds with 1 stone? A stronger NATO and also the Europeans able to protect themselves without the US should the occasion arise? Thank you.
We are not preparing for that last part of your question. So the assumption is, and this is exactly what the US wants, stay involved in NATO very strongly. But at the same time, also expecting the Europeans, one, to spend the same as they do when it comes to the overall spending on defence, Europeans and Canada equalizing with the US, but also for the Europeans to take a bigger responsibility for the defence of the European part of NATO, with the US long-term still here when it comes to the nuclear, but also when it comes to the conventional. don't forget that the defense of the US mainland starts in Norway. And why does it start in Norway? Because these huge nuclear submarines from Russia, if they can pass Norway, can come too close to the American coast, would pose a direct threat to the United States. This is just one example that NATO is not only there to defend the European mainland, but also to defend the US mainland. So we are in this together. But I always felt that it is strange that a very rich part of the world, Europe is a very rich, maybe the richest part of the world, needs the support of another part of the world to defend itself against the Russians, to the extent it has now, where we are over-reliant on one ally, being the United States. And what you will see over the coming years is a more equal, is a shift, a gradual shift, where the Europeans take this bigger responsibility, with the United States firmly anchored in the transatlantic relationship.
Okay, coming over here, fourth row.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And Greta Karvala from Kauppalehti, Finland. I would like to ask, has Ukraine's growing defensive capability weakened Putin's position? What is analysis in NATO of this?
Well, clearly, Ukraine is putting up a strong defense. And when you look at the front line at the moment, it is stabilizing. There are even reports that Ukraine is in net terms regaining territory. Not massively, but at least it is stabilizing. And potentially even moving now in the right direction and not any longer in the wrong direction. So from the west to the east and not from the east to the west. And this is amazing. And this is what the Ukrainians are doing. And the Ukrainians have been incredible ingenious in terms of their ability to innovate. And this is one of the things we are learning all over NATO from Ukraine. For example, when it comes to the drone warfare and the anti-drone technologies. This is why we have JTEC, this joint organization in Poland, where we capture all the lessons from the war so that we can figure them in the NATO plans. So I would not be too happy if I was Putin today, but I was never happy if I was Putin, but particularly not the last couple of weeks, because things are not going in the right direction.
All right, coming over here, second row.
Hi, Victor Jack from Politico. Thanks so much for the press conference.
All right, we've just been
ask,
hearing from Mark Rutte there, a NATO chief, speaking following a NATO meeting in Sweden on European defence and security. Well, joining me on set to debrief what we've been hearing is our international affairs editor, Philip Tarl. Philip, so we just heard from Rutte there. He really put an emphasis on sustained increase in defence spending. He also vowed, again, continued EU support for Ukraine, and he also touched upon Iran. What stood out to me, what struck me, was the lack of mention on the US deployment of troops to Poland.
Yeah, no mention of that at all in that press conference. A very upbeat message from Mark Rutte. I think maybe in inverted commas, he's saying we're coming together. Everything has increased for the better. We've got more spending. It's up 20% in Canada, for example, on NATO spending following the Hague Agreement last year to increase GDP spending on NATO by 5%. He said our armed forces are going to be able to get the equipment they need to face any threat. And also, we are able to produce faster in making the weapons we need also to help Ukraine, and that Europe has got to come together to get weapons from the United States, which they buy from the United States and then will sell on to the Ukrainians, whom he said were fighting bravely, and we are making an essential, predictable and sustainable effort for Ukraine via NATO. So a very upbeat message from Mark Rutte, and asked a bit indirectly about the role of the United States, saying that, well, NATO should no longer be dependent on a country which is as rich as Europe. And so he said he'd always found it rather strange that one of the richest areas of the world, i.e. Europe, was dependent on another of the richest areas of the world for its defence. What would happen now is that Europe would have to build up its own defences to be able to be independent of the United States, but the United States would still be there. I think trying to allay fears that the US was thinking about leaving NATO, quite quick in dismissing that question from a journalist in the room, saying, well, are we able to foresee that there could be a NATO without US backing in the future?
And he also mentioned Article 5. He really emphasized the European allies' commitment to the Article 5. He called it ironclad. At one point, he even said, we are in this fight together. But the big question, I guess, is the US on the same page when it comes to this?
Well, we don't know. I think what Mark Rutte, and he's always said this, there's nothing new in what he's saying this afternoon, is that there's no criticism of Donald Trump. He will not criticize the US president. He knows that that is not going to do him any good, or NATO either. So he will try to get round that and dismiss criticism that maybe the US might not want to come to the aid of another NATO country if there is an attack on that country, saying, yes, you're right, ironclad, that is Article 5. Basically, Article 5 means an attack on one NATO country is an attack on all NATO countries, so all NATO countries will come to the aid of that nation. He said anyone attacking any NATO country would face what he called devastating consequences. I think that was a message directed towards Vladimir Putin about the threats that the Russians could launch an attack into an East European country and a NATO state within the next couple of years or so. So as far as Mark Rutte is concerned, yes, Article 5 is still intact. NATO is still intact. What he wants to see is NATO building more capacity to produce weapons in Europe, to be slightly more independent of the United States, but saying, as far as the US is concerned, he doesn't have any worries about them trying to leave NATO because they are an integral part of the NATO command.
Now, the fact that there's a bit of a chasm, if you will, between European allies and the US, it makes it increasingly unclear for the EU about what areas they should prioritize when formulating defense strategies, doesn't it?
I think there is certainly a lot of worry in Europe about what Donald Trump could do next. We didn't have any mention of these troops being moved from Germany, for example, after this falling out between Donald Trump and the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, last month, and Donald Trump not appreciating remarks Friedrich Merz made about Donald Trump and the war in Iran, saying that he'd basically made a mistake in launching this war and had been overwhelmed by what had happened there. So that led to Donald Trump saying, well, I'm taking 5,000 troops out of Germany. Now we found out they're being redeployed in Poland. This is a very uneven, unpredictable situation, but everybody knows that Donald Trump operates that way. From one day to the next, he can make a completely different decision. But I think there is a feeling in NATO that, okay, we're in the middle of the Trump administration right now, but Donald Trump is not eternal. NATO is going to last a lot longer than Donald Trump. What we need to do is to make sure that NATO can survive the Trump administration and come out intact the other end, and then things may eventually get back to normal. I think that's basically the hidden message in what Mark Rutte has been saying this afternoon. But certainly, you're right, there is a lot of uneasiness, I think, amongst European nations, members of NATO, who are not in an agreement with Donald Trump's decision to go to war in Iran. They're very concerned about the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz, the effect that's having on oil prices, fuel costs, and on everyday living costs for people in their own countries, where this is all going. And many countries, even here in France, the Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, yesterday saying that he didn't believe that the war in Iran was going to be over any time soon. That was why they were bringing out new measures to try to help some of the poorer people in France make ends meet when it comes to fuel costs. So I think there definitely is concern that this doesn't seem to be going anywhere very quickly. And the reply from Marco Rubio today was, well, we're still negotiating with the Iranians. Yes, there has been some progress, but we still don't know whether we're going to reach an accord or whether Donald Trump is going to start bombing Iran again.
Yes, so now all eyes on the Ankara summit, which is set to take place in July. In the meantime, Philip, thank you very much. That's our international affairs editor, Philip Turl.